We know that we're a toss-up state, but we also know that we have a strong African American population across the state, and every one of us needs to vote.
Black lives do matter in every election.
The moment that we stop seeing color on a person, I think that's the moment that we're gonna actually have a better world.
Hello and welcome to American Views, France 24's special coverage in the lead up to the 2020 U.S. presidential election. Now, rarely has the nation been so divided. So to take the pulse of the country, we're going to take you on a road trip to 6 key swing states that will be critical in determining who ends up in the White House. All in all, we'll be traveling about 10,000 kilometers around the country to find out how everyday Americans feel about this election. Our first stop is here in North Carolina. Now, in many ways, North Carolina is the archetype of a swing state, split between cities with liberal professionals and black voters and college students, and then vast agricultural areas where the vote tends to be whiter and more conservative. There are 15 electoral college votes up for grabs in North Carolina, but before we dive in, let's take a look at some other key features of this southern state.
With the Atlantic Ocean to the east and the Appalachian Mountains to the west, vast plains make up the rest of North Carolina. A former slave-owning state, North Carolina has a population of just over 10 million. The state has a high number of evangelical Christians. It's part of the Bible Belt. Traditionally, the state's economy has been built on agriculture, tobacco in particular. Today, North Carolina is also known for its tech sector, centered around the Research Triangle in the capital, Raleigh. Politically, the state has tended to vote Democrat, but since the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, it's leaned more Republican. North Carolina has 15 electoral college votes. Its student-packed cities are more moderate, while the countryside tends to be conservative. In 2020, it's the African American vote that could be decisive. Making up 22% of the state's population, it was high turnout among African Americans, which helped Barack Obama take the state, and their abstention, which brought victory to Donald Trump.
We're here in Charlotte, the economic capital of North Carolina. Now, back in 2016, the city was the scene of tense protests following the fatal police shooting of a black man named Keith Lamont Scott. The question of police violence, particularly against African Americans, has been a hot-button issue in the United States for years and prompted the creation of the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, things really reached a boiling point this summer following the police killing of another black man, George Floyd. There were nationwide protests and calls for police reform. And here in Charlotte, artists came downtown and painted this massive tribute to Black Lives Matter. With the election just around the corner, voters say it's a crucial issue.
Politicians, campaign workers, everybody has to know that, Black lives do matter in every election, everyday life.
We just want to make sure that our lives are valued because we are people too, and we have helped build these great cities that, some of these shootings are going on, as well as having African American women and men on the police force. So everyone just wants to feel safe and included.
It does say Black Lives Matter, but I think it's a movement for all minorities. Now you see young people, old people, kids, all kinds of races, all kinds of colors. If the moment that we stop seeing color on a person, I think that's the moment that we're going to actually have a better world.
This summer, there were similar protests in Raleigh, the state capital. How have things changed over the past few months? This is a report by our correspondents Mathieu Mabin and Kitivan Gorgistani.
These two young men are both 23 years old. They grew up together in Raleigh, North Carolina. In recent months, like many African Americans across the country, they've taken part in the mass protests against racial inequality and police brutality. They agreed to speak on camera if they could keep their masks on and change their names.
I think that there are two different justices, a systematic thing. I think, African American people are just kind of like the easy target for that foundation for a certain foundation of the pyramid that seems, for them, it has to remain this way.
For these young men, the justice system needs to change as well as law enforcement.
I believe the police can change with a lot of training, just a lot of training, and just remembering their code to serve the people. Let's start there.
Police reform is what state officials are pushing for, but only the police itself can implement those changes. At the Raleigh Police Academy, Sergeant Billy Garton is in charge of bringing about some of those changes. After 20 years on the force, Sergeant Garton is now training the next generation of police officers.
They look like they have a little bit of pressure.
Well, they like to move fast when I speak.
For their very first day at the academy, new recruits are taught the basics of policing with a new focus.
And that journey is for you to try to accomplish successfully navigating the remaining portion of this academy. One of the main things you must possess to be effective in police work is compassion. Compassion is not an option, it's a must. Every human being you encounter deserves respect. You're going to practice giving that respect to each and every person, someone who lives on the street or the president. Compassion is the key. Did I make myself clear?
Yes, sir.
Class, fall out.
This is the way!
Quickly.
As the United States grapples with highly publicized police brutality cases, recruits like these are bound to come under increased scrutiny. With a direct line to the governor's office, Sergeant Garton has the green light to dismiss anyone that doesn't follow the rules of a more social approach to policing.
Nobody likes a bad cop worse than a good cop. And with that being said, we do a pretty good job at policing ourselves. And so I've met very few what people would consider bad police officers because they don't last long. There is no room for bad police work.
The political pressure stemming from George Floyd's death has forced law enforcement to start addressing structural issues, with many hoping that those changes will materialize on the streets.
We're back here in Charlotte to find out how the city has tried to instigate change in the wake of allegations of police violence. And we're here with the mayor, Lyles. Now, thank you so much for being on the show today. You were elected in December 2017. You're the first African-American female mayor of Charlotte. And following the shooting of Keith Lamont Scott in 2016, you proposed a broad plan, a 7-point plan to reduce racial and class divisions in the city. Part of that plan was approved by the council. Would you say that it's been effective?
I think we accomplished what we set out to do, which was to make sure that people understood that we knew that they needed housing, we knew that they needed jobs, but we also started with reform. President Obama had a police report on 20th century policing, and we began to do that. Was it effective? At the time, yes, but change happens, and we have to be responsive to what's current, and I think that we need to do more now.
And you, as mayor, are responsible of law and order in the city of Charlotte. What would you say your police force needs the most in the city?
Right now, what we need is the trust of the community, that we're actually here to help and solve real crime and not be harassment or not be in a situation where we're discriminating against people, not making traffic stops that are unnecessary. We need to get the trust back.
And the issue of police brutality, particularly against African Americans, is part of a broader issue of civil rights. And across the nation, there have been allegations of voter suppression, of gerrymandering, particularly against black voters. Would you say that that's the case here in North Carolina?
I wouldn't say they're allegations. I think it's very much the case. When we talk about having a federal government or a president that says, you know, put police at voting stations and polling locations, that's suppression. Gerrymandering so that people of color cannot impact elections, that's really voter suppression. So it's happening. And it's something we need to write. We need to write it very quickly. Otherwise, we're going to be so divided in this country that I'm not so sure we can ever guarantee that we wouldn't have the violence that we've been seeing periodically. It may even be worse.
And do you think that black voters are motivated and ready to get out and vote in this election, particularly during this historic time?
I know they are. I know that because on day one voting, we had 50% more than we had in 16 or 12. And so we are seeing the voters to come out. I think that the president has really caused people to say, can I do this for another 4 years? And they're coming out to support Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I think having a black woman as the vice president nominee in the Democratic Party has been of great assist to the idea that people will come out and vote, especially black women. Who wouldn't want their daughter to see a woman of achievement, a woman of color that's achieving this great opportunity?
And when push comes to shove, do you think that who wins North Carolina, will that come down to black voters?
It will absolutely be about the turnout of black voters. I think that I've been encouraging people to get out and vote very, very early. We know that we're a toss-up state. We know that it'll make a difference in the Electoral College, but we also know that we have a strong African-American population across the state, and every one of us needs to vote.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Mayor.
Thank you for having me.
When it comes to the question of police violence against African Americans and whether it's even an issue, the two presidential candidates couldn't be any more different. While Republican Donald Trump is in favor of a law and order approach, his rival, Democrat Joe Biden, says he's open to reform. Well, that wraps it up for this edition of American Views. Thank you for watching, and join us for the next episode where we'll be heading 400 kilometers south of here to the state of Georgia, where we'll explore the evangelical vote and how that could sway the election. See you next time.